Good morning, folks. Welcome to our January A Garden in Every Season tour. We're going to just hang out here for a little bit, see if anybody joins us, and keep your fingers crossed that the signal works out. It worked for the December live stream, so I am ever hopeful that it will work as well in this new year that we've arrived in. Your weather report from Highlands today, it's pretty chilly. There's been frost. You can see it on the cabins over there, the cottages, sorry. Sometimes on the leaves that we've got around here. There's a little bit of ice on the pond, but not a great deal. They're calling for snow possibly later this week, so we will see if that happens. Calling for a lot of snow, but I won't hold my breath. All right, and we're gonna get going. Welcome to our January 4th A Garden in Every Season live tour. It is a brand new year. We are off to a brand new start of programming, so thank you for joining me. My name is Paige Engelbrektsson, and I am the Nature Center Education Specialist for the Highlands Biological Foundation, which supports natural history and research here, primarily at the Highlands Biological Station, through programs like this one. We are going to be going on a ramble today. Our Garden in Every Season tour is designed to highlight what's been changing here in the Botanical Garden over the last month or so. But the winter time, things have slowed down drastically. So between that and the holidays today, we're just going to walk through the garden, see if anything catches our eyes, and answering any questions that you guys may have. And if I don't know the answer, I can find somebody who does, hopefully. Our streams are running pretty strong right now. We had some good rain last week and on New Year's, so everything's a little wet, as it should be here in a temperate rainforest. Beautiful sun and the shade. Fortunately, the sun is helping to keep it pretty warm. It's a mite chilly today compared to the high 50s that we had over the weekend, which was very warm compared to the teens and 20s that we had around Christmas. So, winter, you never know what it's going to bring. If you all see anything you have questions about, shout it out in the comments. Right now, I'm just seeing a lot of dog hobble. Not a bad thing at all. Hello, and thank you for joining me. We are meandering towards one of our little waterfalls and seeing what exactly we pick up along the way. So, I'm noticing, I keep commenting on my other programs in the last few months, but the more that I look for it, the more I can see these shredded pine cones. Evidence that our red squirrels are staying well fed through the winter. This particular part of the path I'm catching a lot. We've got some over here as well. So, and even over here. I normally hear them more towards the middle part of the garden, so they must be here anyway. And there's more of them as well. what with all the rain, I'm not really seeing a lot of tracks through the rhododendron. There's a little bit of a sandbank. Looks like if anything has been walking around there though, its tracks have been pretty much swept away by all the water we've been getting. I have to check and see what our rainfall total was for 2020 because I'm suspecting it was somewhere around 128 or 129 inches. I think there was a state record set on Mount Mitchell that was 129 inches, so we'll see if we topped that. Ooh, okay. So, in other programs, I have pointed out our Christmas ferns and said that they were the only fern that was present year-round. And as you can see, there are several ferns right here proving me terribly wrong, which has actually been something I've noticed only because I've been preparing for these programs and trying to keep track of what's been changing in the garden. I am honestly genuinely survived that so many of these fancy ferns and rock ferns are still thriving even after the cold weather that we've had. I, in my head, only ever pictured Christmas ferns as being around during Christmas time. But as you can see, these guys here are proving me very wrong. So, learn something every time I come out for a walk out here. And this time it was, oh look, there are plenty of ferns still around, so it's not unusual. If I spot a Christmas fern, I'll point it out. One of the other things I'm noticing as I'm walking around the garden this morning is there are a lot of downed limbs between the snow and some of the high winds we've been getting. Sometimes these weaker branches will fall off. Anybody familiar with this particular plant? And why I'm looking very closely for any small white bundles? The 2-line is a really good giveaway if the needle can confuse you. Sometimes between firs and spruces and hemlocks it can be hard to tell. This is a eastern hemlock, which I can tell because it has short needles that appear to have 2 white lines on the bottom. And when I look at the needles on the side, they look fairly flat. If this was a Carolina hemlock, they would be all around the twig, kind of like a bottle brush. But since they're flat like a comb, that tells me this is an eastern hemlock. And this is actually, I'm very pleased not to see any white egg masses on the needles. Our hemlocks have been dealing with an invasive insect called the hemlock woolly adelgid. We've got a couple of hemlocks growing right around here, actually, these evergreens with the kind of cloudy looking foliage. So the fact that they're alive is actually due to efforts on the part of the station. There's an invasive insect called the hemlock woolly adelgid that has moved down the Appalachians, and if you are familiar with hemlocks that you find on the ground, you'll often find small white egg masses, and those are the adelgid eggs. When they hatch, hundreds of adelgid larvae will essentially drain the needles. They'll pierce it and suck the nutrients out. And if it's like death by 1,000 cuts, you can survive 1 paper cut, you can survive 100 paper cuts, but eventually there's a certain threshold where you're going to lose enough blood to die. In the case of the hemlocks, it seems to be that when they have enough larvae sucking the nutrients out of their needles, they go into a drought response. They keep trying to pull in more water to replace what's being lost and eventually succumb. They can't keep it up. So that's an ongoing problem here in the Highlands Plateau. But the good news is we can treat the hemlocks so that they, with insecticides, so they have a reduced load of adelgid. And we can also release these Japanese predatory beetles that feed only on the hemlock adelgid. So fingers crossed, biocontrol and people control will help keep our hemlocks healthy until we can figure out a way to save them. Hemlocks are frequently seen dead around here, unfortunately. People will ask, what are the dead pines? And it's actually dead hemlocks. So, sorry. Get you all on track here. So actually there's a hemlock. Hopefully y'all can see it despite the sun, sorry. There is a hemlock right here, and you can see how it looks kind of scraggly. That's one of the ways they can start looking when the adelgid starts feeding on them. They start losing needles, and eventually it becomes too much. So when you see full green hemlocks, this is a hemlock, this lower tree over here is a hemlock, the greenery right here, that's all healthy hemlocks. That's because we've been treating them. And you'll see on the trees themselves, they'll have these silver tags. Those help us keep track of when and how we treated them so that they stay alive. This part of the garden, it's really strange to look at for me personally, because you can see all these tall, dead plants. These are coneflowers, which at one point, a couple of months ago, filled this whole section of the garden in so thickly and so tall, it was all that you could see. And so, looking at it now when they've all died back is a change. Here's another hemlock branch. No adelgid though. Huzzah! Hey folks, thanks for joining me. And if you have any thoughts or questions, shout them out. We're just kind of perusing the garden right now. I got sidetracked talking about invasive species. So yeah, I'm circling back to there are still many ferns out in the middle of winter. Here's an entire fern glade that's still thriving, surviving despite the cold. Not a Christmas fern to be seen. Let's actually check out. Oh, still no Christmas fern. All right. Hey, Kenny, that is the hope. Huh. Okay. Gonna get back here so I don't have to yell over the waterfall. Or try to get back here so I don't have to yell over water. What I was just noticing over by the waterfall, ooh, I'm washed out. it looks like the sheets of moss that have been growing on that rock have been peeled away. I see that frequently up on the rock outcrops here in Highlands, like Sunset Rock. You get these mats of algae and plants growing, and then like an animal will flip it over. That looks more like the water from the waterfall overflowed and actually scoured it off of that rock, which is interesting. I've never seen that happen before. Admittedly, I haven't looked too terribly closely. So that might speak to how much water was coming down that little channel with all of the snow melting and then the rain moving in. So, all right, so we have a question from Kenny about what the average temperature range on the Highlands Plateau is this time of year. That's a really great question. I'm not sure what the typical temperature range is. It seems to be that like mid to low 20s at night up to high 40s during the day is reasonable. Doesn't seem unexpected. We did have a 60-degree day over the weekend, and then we had a 22-degree day on Christmas Day. So those could be anomalies as opposed to representative. We have a weather station actually on the other side of campus that's in the process of being set up that will provide temperature and rain information on the website. So when that's finally up and running, we will let you guys know, and then you can keep tabs on it yourself, and maybe we can compile a norm and see what that looks like. Good question. All right, I'm gonna come up here where it's a little bit quieter. Because one of the other things, in addition to the hemlock branches falling and showing potentials for woolly adelgids, a lot of the times when limbs fall from high up in the canopy or high on a tree, they can have all sorts of interesting things on them. So if you spot one, stop and take a look at it, because you notice things that we won't be able to see from the ground. Anybody know what these are? See a couple of different things here. So here, let me this little green thing. This is moss, this little spiky green thing. But the flat coloring and these leafy bits are something else. So Melinda is suggesting fungus. You are partially right. Kenny is suggesting lichen, and he has nailed it. So for those of you who may not know, this and this really shield, like thin layer, are what we call lichens. Let me see if I can do a switcheroo here. It's been a hot minute. There we go. Okay, excellent. So, lichens are this really fascinating, really neat thing that we have a lot of here in Highlands and in the Southern Appalachians in general, because we're a temperate rainforest that's really wet, so they love our conditions. What you have in a lichen is two partners. You have Freddy fungus, so Melinda, you were half right, and Alice algae, and they've taken a lichen to each other to make one symbiotic unit. What we see here, this crusty bit, the actual structure I'm touching, is from a fungus. But this green coloration, it's very mild right now, but it's still there. That comes from the algae. So they partner up, and what do you think each of them provides and gets from this partnership? Here's another one. Again, the physical part I'm touching is from the fungus, but that green coloration is from the algae. sure there's some other good ones around here. Oh, yeah. This is another example. I believe it's Usnea. And touching the fungus, but you're seeing that color comes from the algae. The fungus is providing a physical structure. It's providing the shelter for the algae. And it's also collecting rain and nutrients from the tree that it's growing on. The algae, in turn, is collecting up the sunlight and providing, it's photosynthesizing and turning it into sugars, which it's then providing to the fungus. So the algae is protected and is fed, and then in turn feeds the fungus itself. So it's a really cool partnership that's very successful, and they love our part of the world, again, because of how wet it is. We actually have here at the station, we have a summer course, 2 weeks, that's entirely about lichens, and you would just be amazed at how much information there is. Here's another example of a lichen. Moss is pretty distinct because it's this kind of feathery, very soft, usually a darker green, very like velvety to touch. Lichens, on the other hand, are usually pretty bristly or stiff or completely flat, and they're usually not that rich green. They can be orange, they can be white, they can be pale green, as we were seeing. So, I mean, just walking around, I'm looking at my feet now and spotting a whole bunch. Yeah, it's pretty quiet the month of December here in the garden. We've got moss here. Again, it's soft, velvety, that sheeny green color. And then here, we've got a couple of different kinds of lichen right alongside moss. Yeah, not a lot else going on here in the botanical garden. So. Well, here's a hemlock branch that I thought had woolly adelgid eggs on it, but those light green specks are actually lichen. Any questions or thoughts that you guys might have? Happy to answer them. Bigger one. Still clean. It's interesting because the hard, cold winters are great for controlling the woolly adelgid. They, like other invertebrates, like ticks, they tend to die off in higher numbers when we have a really cold winter, but a more mild winter means that more of them survive. So when we do get those really chilly days, I start cheering in the back of my mind going, yes! Fewer woolly adelgids to start the year off with. So Kenny is asking if lichen form mostly in humid areas. That is a really good question. They are dependent on enough moisture for the fungus will dry out and then come back to life essentially when it gets wet. There's a really cool couple of different kinds of fungus that when they're dry are this really pale color, and then you submerge them in the water and they turn this instant bright green. But in terms of regions, I expect you probably won't find many in desert-like areas, but you can find lichens in Antarctica. You can find them in the Arctic. They're very, very slow growing. So if they are able to get enough sunlight, like only for a few months a year, they will still grow. It's just incrementally, bit by bit, teeny bit by bit. And they're actually one of the first species you find up on mountains. When there's no dirt, the lichens can grow directly on the rock and break it down, creating dirt for everything else to grow. I would expect to find them most places. Deserts are the only part where I'd be a little iffy about whether they're there or not. That's a really good question. If anybody else knows the answer, please feel free to chime in. Ooh, here is a really cool part of our botanical garden. Any guesses about what plant I have directly above me? The trees? These are hemlocks. And right now, I am standing under what is entirely hemlock canopy. This used to be the norm. Hemlocks used to be very common here in the southern Appalachians. But now the chance to stand entirely under hemlocks and be shaded is something that doesn't happen very much anymore. So if you come walking through the botanical garden, definitely swing by this part and take a look. Embrace it. Okay, so Roxanne is responding to the question about lichen in humid areas, and she's saying they can grow in the desert but slowly and not as well as they do in this type of climate. That's awesome. Thank you very much. Nothing exceptional in the mud. Mostly just people. If it does snow here later this week, I'm going to be really interested to see what tracks I can find. Usually mud is as good a substrate as I've got. So this limb came down from somewhere higher. Let's see. So I've got an actual fungus on its own. Looks like it's a relative of the turkey tail. Sorry for the focusing. But I've got a lichen here, this blue-gray one. Got another lichen. Got some moss. One thing that is cool to point out is the difference between the impact of, work with me on this, that works, the impact of a fungus versus a lichen on a tree. So if I see a tree branch with lichen and fungus, mushrooms growing out of it, anybody know what that tells me about the health of this particular branch? John, I'm very glad that you're enjoying the stroll. You are most welcome. Thanks for joining us. Just by looking at this branch and seeing fungi on it, I know this branch was dead. Fungi actually grow in the wood itself, inside of here, and break down what they grow through. They basically secrete fluids. I have to brush up on that again. But their bodies grow inside of this branch and are breaking it down from the inside out. And that happens when a tree is dead or very close to it. So I know that this branch was dead long before it came down. But lichen, on the other hand, is growing only on the surface of the branch. It's only growing on the bark. So if you see a branch that has only lichen, that tells you the branch is probably still healthy. It probably gets a lot of sun when there's no foliage, if there's that much lichen. But you can have a tree covered in lichen that's still perfectly healthy. It's when you see fungi start to pop up that you should be concerned, because that happens when a tree is on its way out. So, sometimes I get questions about that, so I figured I'd pass it on. Ooh. Okay, so here's another, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked by lichen. They're so cool though. Here is another lichen, and you can just see this is bits of the bark that it was anchored in. It's just come entirely off. It'll die now that it's on the ground and it's going to get covered up by leaves. But it's not growing into the tree so much as it's just growing on the bark, so it won't harm it. You can actually make dyes, natural dyes from lichen and fungus. So that is always something that I keep telling myself, someday I'll figure out how to do that. It hasn't happened yet, but you know, maybe one day. That's about all that I've spotted. Sorry, just stopped because I was looking at all these pine cones we've got around here, and then I noticed this, which is very similar in shape, but from an entirely different plant. And it looks like most of the seeds are gone, which is good. Some still tucked in here. This is from a magnolia. Now, we've got a couple that are growing around here. That's probably where that came from. Yep, just more down branches. Are you... Yeah, so I'm gonna say this is another eastern hemlock because those needles are nice and flat. I was stopping to see if it was a Carolina hemlock, and I could use that as an example. But don't know that we have one on this side of the garden. All right, we are back to the garden entrance. My fingers aren't frozen by now, which is a pleasant surprise. But I don't really know that there's that much more to talk about here in the garden. Still seeing a lot of little down hemlock limbs, but none with delged egg sacs on it, which is good, all things considered. Okay. Yeah, more ferns over here, proving me wrong. So any fern you see right now is not necessarily a Christmas fern. So keep an open mind, I guess. I'm learning to every day around here. Nature always proves me wrong. All right, any last questions or thoughts before I wrap up? Thank you all for joining me. I'm very glad that we're getting to live stream again, and hope you enjoyed the more casual ramble style. Hopefully in February, things will be picking up and we'll have a little bit more concrete changes to talk about. I'm actually grateful that there's not that much new, because my daffodils are trying to bloom right now, or they're coming up anyway, and I think it's way too early. So hopefully everything's going to stay dormant until later in the spring when it's less risky for them to pop out. Okay. Kenny is asking about the Galax and whether that's still green, and if it's still being green is normal. The answer is yes. Galax is one of our low-growing evergreens, so it will be green all year round. It has a very thick, thick, leathery, waxy leaf that helps to prevent water loss. And being low-growing means that they get some of the heat of the earth to stay a little bit warmer. So they are actually green all year round, and I'm wondering, I'm going to head up because I want to show you. They're not necessarily green the entire winter, though. Roxanne, thank you for joining. I'm glad that you enjoyed. And we will be doing another one the first Monday in February. Rachel Martin, our new horticulturalist, may be taking these on. Okay, I'm going to go off trail here. Please ignore the no trail sign. So here we have another evergreen, much like Galax, often confused with Galax. This is Shortia, or a Coney Bell, and you'll notice some of it's green, but this purple bronze color, that is also a color it will turn in the winter, and Galax will as well as dog hobble and a couple of other plants. This is sunscreen, essentially. When they have too much sun, because there's no overhead foliage and the sun's just beating down on them all day long, that can damage the leaf. So they actually produce this bronzy sunscreen to help reduce the amount of light entering the leaf to keep them intact. But yes, it is normal for them to be green all year round. Jane, you are welcome, and Lori, it is a really nice day. For all that it's chilly, a sunny day around here is a day to be taken advantage of. So if you guys are in the area, feel free to come out to the Botanical Garden. We are open dawn to dusk year round. Please wear masks in the event that you pass other people on the trails. We certainly had a lot of folks here in Highlands for the holidays, so I hope if you were in town, you got a chance to stop by and check everything out. Other things to mention before we wrap up. We are having our Nature 101 this month on winter tree ID, which is a tricky subject. So we're going to try and keep it simple, and see if we can find some cool ways to make a live stream program up close and personal, because that's really what you have to be with plants in general, but especially in the winter. So check us out the third Tuesday at 1 p.m. The date is slipping my mind, but we will have announcements in our e-blast if you're interested. You can sign up for that at highlandsbiological.org. Sorry. Yeah, so Nature 101, the next garden tour in February. Things are quiet, but we are ever hopeful for spring, much like our botanical garden. So thank you guys so much for joining and for watching and learning a little bit. And if you have any more comments or questions, please drop them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them after the program ends. And thank you for supporting the foundation, which makes all of this possible. It's greatly appreciated. Here is to a new year full of sunshine and great outdoor spaces and more programs. Thank you all. Bye.